So I want to welcome everybody. My name is Jens Reinke. I am the director of the Institute for the Study of Humanistic Buddhism at ISHB at University of the West. I warmly welcome you in the name of the Institute to the third installment of our monthly lecture series, Modern and Contemporary Buddhist Encounters in the Southern Sinosphere. The lecture series is organized by the Institute's scholarly working group, with the same name, which is part of the Institute's overarching initiative to promote the multifaceted study of Chinese Buddhism under the global condition. The working group examines post-19th century entanglements amongst Buddhist actors and their surrounding societies throughout the Southern Sinosphere, a region comprised of the South Chinese Sea and its bordering countries. Today's lecture by Dr. Ester Bianchi is the third of 7 lectures held by members of the group. The title of Dr. Bianchi's lecture is The Theravada Model and Early Buddhist Meditation in the Republic of China. Dr. Bianchi holds a PhD in Indian and East Asian civilization from the University of Venice. She is currently Associate Professor of Chinese Religions and Philosophy and of Society and Culture of China, and coordinator of the double degree in World Religions and Philosophy and in Cultural Heritage, Religion and Society of the Department of Philosophy, Social Sciences and Education of the University of Perugia and the Department of Religious Studies of Furen University in Taipei. Her research is centered on Sino-Tibetan Buddhism, Chinese Buddhist monasticism, the revival of Buddhist monastic discipline, and more recently, the rediscovery of early meditation techniques and the spread of the Theravada Buddhist model in modern Chinese Buddhism. Before we begin, just a few more words on the format of today's event. Dr. Bianchi will give her presentation for about 40 minutes, followed by 20 minutes for questions from the audience. The Q&A session will be moderated by Dr. Vivian Walters, the Institute's graduate affiliate. Once the talk has ended, if you have a question, please use the raise hand function, and Vivian will unmute you. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Ester Bianchi.
So thank you so much, Jens, for this presentation, and I want to thank also Riverrain for being so helpful and ready always. And I also wish to greet some friends that I saw in the audience, and I happened to see Karma Tsamolekshe, and I just wanted to greet her since she's in video. Hi, hello, Venerable. And also all the others, of course, but I just happened to see her. Last time was in Taiwan lecture. Okay, so thank you so much. I think I will share my screen. And okay, and then we tried a while ago. Okay, you've seen the right one, Jens, are you? Okay, thank you. So, good morning, evening to everybody, depends from where you are. I really want to thank Jens Reinke for inviting me today, but particularly I want to thank him for inviting me to take part in the working group on modern and contemporary Buddhist encounters in the Southern Sinosphere. It's a couple of years now that I've been working on 2 related topics. On the one hand, the rediscovery of early meditation techniques in modern China, which also includes, but not exclusively, the discovery of Theravada meditation techniques. And on the other hand, the development of a form of Vipassana meditation in contemporary China, namely Mahasati meditation, and my contribution to the working group directed by Jens ultimately will be focused on the contemporary situation. So I will take the Mahasati dynamic Vipassana movement as a case study, and I will focus on Mahasati networks between China and Thailand in the new millennium. But this is something that has to come also, because due to the pandemic, I was not able to do the fieldwork that I had in mind during the last 2 years. So the recent enthusiasm for Theravada meditation among Chinese Buddhists began approximately at the turn of the 21st century, and has been studied at length and deep by Elsa Lau, who is also part of our working group. And we will have one of her talks, I think, very soon. It should be, however, noticed that despite the modernity of the Vipassana, forms of Vipassana involved, these Theravada meditation techniques, including the Mahasati I've been working on, retain the allure of being early Buddhist practices and are welcomed as such by their Chinese practitioners. So this allows me to create a connection between the present-day phenomenon and similar phenomena of the Republican era, so of the first half of the 20th century. So in other words, I am convinced that the origins of Theravada meditation's popularity in contemporary China may be traced to the first half of the 20th century and the arrival in China of a modern understanding of Buddhism, which includes a trend to re-evaluate the Buddha's original teachings. So today, that's why today I'm going to focus on the Theravada model and early Buddhist meditation in the Republic of China. I have to say that this is not original or new material. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to present today forms the first half of a forthcoming article to be published in a volume edited by Yoshiko Ashiwa, David Wong, and Jige on the metamorphosis of Buddhism in New Era China. And I have also to add, just to be fair, that preliminary results of this research were already presented at Stanford Center for Buddhist Studies and in Paris at the Centre d'études interdisciplinaires sur le bouddhisme. Okay, enough with this. So, oops, here. In my talk today, I will present the spread of Theravada-inspired meditation techniques within Republican mainstream Chinese Buddhism. So I'm not going to talk about the spread of Theravada Buddhism to core, but of the impact of Theravada Buddhism on mainstream Chinese Buddhism. So after a preliminary clarification of the Chinese terminology implied to refer to Theravada, I will discuss the rediscovery of early meditation practices in the Chinese Buddhist canon, as well as the introduction of Theravada forms of meditation and teachings during China's Republican era. So more precisely, I want to make an attempt to evaluate the significance of this Theravada model within this phenomenon. And in my concluding remarks, if I will have time, we will see, I will try to understand the implications of this phenomenon, but also address briefly the legacy of the phenomenon in contemporary China. So, before addressing my topic, I believe that a clarification of what is here implied by the use of the term Theravada is due. I am not going to take part to take any part in the rich and debated discussion among scholars, mainly among scholars in Southern Buddhism, but not only, about the implications of the term Theravada. This is not my field, and I would not be qualified to do so. As you all know, the just a few words about that are due anyway. So as you all know, from a denominational perspective, the Pāli term Theravada, Stavira Nikaya in Sanskrit, typically referred to one of the two Nikayas that supposedly emerged during the Second Buddhist Synod, and later split in further sub-denominations. However, and this is what I am interested today, following the modern development of Buddhist studies in Europe and Japan, Theravada came to signify a text-based pure form of Buddhism associated with Pāli Canon and other related Pāli Buddhist literature. In recent years, many scholars have started to argue that there is a historical continuity in the use of Theravada as a sign of Buddhist identities in those very regions, and I'm not going to debate about that. But this is the idea and the notion that came to China. So that's what I am interested in now. So this modern construct, which was developed in Europe, was increasingly adopted by the same Buddhists in Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, in the early years of the 20th century. And this very topic, this very construct, is connected with the idea of original Buddhism, which came to be identified with the Pāli Buddhism of South and Southeast Asia. Okay. These very ideas came to China very soon at the beginning of the 20th century. However, while this understanding came to China, so the understanding of the Southern Buddhist tradition being closely related to acknowledged original Buddhism, the use of the term, the Chinese term for Theravada, which means Shan, you see it here, Shan Cua Pu or Shan Cua Fo Jiao. This came later. So in the early 20th century, Chinese sources that I could consult, they still use, most of them still use the standard Chinese term for Hinayana, so Xiao Shan, when referring to South and Southeast Asian Buddhist traditions, even when no negative connotations are implied. Fewer sources name these traditions after their respective countries of origins, like in the case here of Myanmar Buddhism, but a growing number of sources throughout the Republican era employ the new labels of Southern Buddhism or Pāli Buddhism. But be aware of the fact that this was done at a time when many Southern Buddhists themselves began to adopt Theravada as a marker of identity. The term Shan Cua Pu or Shan Cua Fo Jiao, to refer to this modern concept of Theravada Buddhism, began to be used only later in China. And this happened after a number of monks who had traveled to South and Southeast Asia and were thus familiar with this idea, with this modern definition of Theravada, returned home. To connect it with our working group, we could say that these monks were the main characters of these early modern encounters in the Sinosphere, in the southern Sinosphere. A prominent example is provided by Fa Fang. You see here some of his some pictures about Fa Fang, and he died actually in very early in 51 in Sri Lanka while being in Sri Lanka. Fa Fang was a very close disciple of the modernist monk Tai Xu, and Fafang, as far as my research has found out, I mean, I may be wrong, but I think that he was the first one to use the notion of Theravada in the modern notion of Theravada to address Southern Buddhism. And this was done, as you can see, in an article written in 1946. It's an article published in honor of Sri Lanka, a Sri Lankan delegation to China. So the term Theravada, Shantuopu, in the modern sense of a unified religious system, came into common usage in China during the Maoist era. And for instance, it was used in this sense by the famous Buddhist scholar Lu Cheng. And more notably, I would say that in the articles published in the Xian Tai Fo Shui, the periodical of the Buddhist Association of China, the term Shan Tzuo Pu is often occurs quite often, and it is always translated as Theravada in the English indexes. So this means that the new notion was definitely acquired at this stage. And finally, since the late 1990s, Shan Tzuo Pu or Nanfang Shan Tzuo Pu have become the common terms to signify South and Southeast Asian Buddhism. So this is Dharma Diplomacy, Buddha Toast Burma. I just put here this image because Lu Cheng's article was written to commemorate this event. Okay. Anyway, regardless of the terminology used to refer to it, so Southern Buddhism, Pāli Buddhism, or we've seen only around the mid of the 20th century Theravada, the Chinese word for Theravada Buddhism. So regardless of this, it is clear that there is a relationship between the spread in China of forms of Buddhist modernism and its search of an original Buddhism, and the belief that the Southern tradition, to more or less extent, reflected that original Buddhism itself. So this allows us to go to the second part of my presentation about the Theravada model and early Buddhist meditation in the Republic of China. So as we will see in a while, in China, these same modernist notions that I've been mentioning a while ago also encouraged the re-evaluation of early meditation techniques included in the Buddhist canon, which came to be equated to those of an idealized Theravada model. Okay, so the arrival of ideas inspired by Buddhist modernism in China during the first half of the 20th century encouraged the rediscovery and re-evaluation of the text in the Hinayana or Shravakayana section of the Chinese Buddhist canon. I use Hinayana only as a translation of Xiaoshan, okay, without any connotation. Some of this literature of these texts offer guidance on meditation techniques. It should be noticed that these practices were equated to Theravada meditation regardless of the fact that they came from the Agamas, and so Buddhist meditation, as it is attested in the Agamas, as a matter of fact, should be distinguished from later forms of Theravada meditation. But this distinction was not done at the very beginning. So this is the first thing to be noticed. The second one is this. It should be noticed also that these forms of meditation, conceived as early Buddhist fundamental meditative techniques, of course, but they were mostly meant to be reintegrated within Chinese Mahayana. As I've told you at the beginning, I'm not speaking about the spread of Theravada Buddhism into China, but of the impact of it on Chinese Buddhism. So in other words, the idea was that of restoring the rich Chinese Mahayana tradition of medieval times, not to support Hinayana Theravada too cure. So many advocates of these practices, most of them were Tiantai or Yogacara practitioners or followers or scholars, but not only. Then you also have tantric ones. So there was a variety of different persons interested in these techniques. Most of them, anyway, were convinced of the fact that Chan Buddhism, by promoting its own view of meditation, had obscured the other forms of Buddhist practices that had reached China earlier, and which they now aimed at reviving, restoring. So, in fact, these forgotten early meditation practices had the advantage of encompassing both the Hinayana and the Mahayana traditions. And they were outlined not only in the Agamas or in other scriptures belonging to the Hinayana, again, a section of the Buddhist canon, but also in relevant Mahayana texts, such as the Yogacara Bhumi, as you can see in this slide, of the Dajjadulun, and the many meditation manuals of medieval time or essays on meditation techniques composed by pre-Chan masters. One important text, which will be mentioned again in a while, just mentioned, but it's important to remember it, is the Jai's exposition of the perfection of the dhyana, of the dhyana paramita. So, the prominent reformist monk Taishu stated that this text by Jai, which kind of outlines these early practices in a systematized and coherent meditative path. So Taishu believed that it was the most comprehensive work of meditation to circulate in China from Han Dynasty all the way through to the end of the northern and southern dynasties, unquote. So these were Taishu's words. So again, as you can see, all this is related to Chinese works in the Chinese Buddhist canon. We will go back to that soon. First, let's have some concrete examples. So one set of early techniques that has proved particularly popular is the 4 bases of mindfulness, or the 4 sites for recollection, the Sanyan Chu or Ju, so the Pāli Satipatthana. And as you know, this set involves 4 forms of contemplation that are practiced either in a series or independently, and you here see a very brief explanation. And they are explained, as we just saw, in some Hinayana scriptures of the Chinese Buddhist canon, which were accordingly rediscovered, reprinted, and circulated. So especially the Nian Chu Jiang, attributed to the Theravada and included in the Agama, and its shorter version in another Agama. And it's interesting because the Nian Chu Jing is still nowadays practiced in some Chinese mainstream Chinese Buddhist monasteries. These texts approximately correspond to the Pāli Satipatthana Sutta, which was later still retranslated from Pāli as well. But this is going to come later, not in these first decades. So the same four sites for recollections were also presented in prominent Mahayana texts, such as those that we have mentioned before. And it is interesting because these lost practices were rediscovered in modern time as fundamental meditative techniques that were still widely practiced by the Theravada Buddhists. So in other words, the main textual reference was to be found in the Chinese canon, but reference to the Theravada model was still done. So that's why I say that the Theravada model was used ideally much more than in concrete sense. So the surge of interest in these practices during the Republican era is testified by a host of articles that appeared in Buddhist periodicals in the 30s and 40s, containing reprints of canonical texts, historical texts on the Senyen Shu, as well as new explanations and commentaries, and also referring to the Pāli Satipatthana. Interestingly, this very set remains a cornerstone of several of the Theravada meditation traditions also today. So, during the Republican era, particular attention was devoted to a form of early meditation, the visualization of the impure, the Ashubha Bhavana, Pujing One in Chinese, a case that I have studied in detail in a recent article that has already been published. So I'm not going to focus on this particular case today. Just suffice it to notice that the Tiantai master Xianmin advocated this practice as a way to counter desire, describing it as a fundamental technique that is common both to Hinayana and Mahayana. As you see, there is always the very same narrative there. And Tang Xuan, who was a student of Tai Xu and who studied also esoteric Buddhism in Japan, he wrote a long article in which he traces references to the technique throughout the Buddhist canon, from the Agamas down to the Mahayana text, down to more modern materials. So I just wanted to mention it, but I don't want to devote to it more time today. And among the techniques, the practices that were also revived are these 5 gates on meditation that you see listed in this slide. And each gate, as you can see, is suited to practitioners with different temperaments. Of these, the 2 more kind of relevant to us today are the first one that we have already mentioned, and the 5th one, the mindfulness of breathing, which was a very much a prominent practice throughout the 20th century, I would say, not only at the beginning of it. So, and this So just to summarize go back to what I tried to tell you before, it is clear that all these techniques that I have been talking about till now were inspired by practices outlined in Chinese canonical texts, and particularly the Yogacara Bhumi and the Agamas, but not only. Also texts written directly in Chinese, as we've seen with the meditation manuals and Jay's compendium. So, we may conclude that apart from a few but relevant cases, which we are going to present in a while, although Theravada meditation was generally viewed as the closest approximation to the original form of Buddhist meditation, there was little inclination to introduce meditative techniques based on new translations from the Pāli, if identical or very similar early Buddhist techniques were already described in Chinese canonical texts. And this is true also for the Vinaya, by the way. This is another topic I've been working on. There was a Theravada model also as far as Vinaya is concerned, but there was no real attempt to introduce Pāli Vinaya into China. Okay, so it's kind of, in the Vinaya case, it's even more evident, but it's kind of similar what's going on here with meditation. So, that said, there were a few notable exceptions, and they kind of are worth of mention. The first one I want to mention regards the mindfulness of breathing. In 1927, the famous Buddhist scholar Tang Yongtong, who had studied Sanskrit and Pali at Harvard, he published the translation of the Southern Anapanasati Sutta, so the Nanchuan Nian An Ban Jing that you can see in the slide. Yes, I didn't write the translation, the title. Anyway, this is a fundamental Theravada Buddhist text that focuses on the mindfulness of breathing. And Tang, in his preface to the translation, it's a very short translation, but it's anyway relevant to our topic today. Tang compares the Pali version with the Chinese translation attributed to An Shi Gao and other texts in the Chinese canon, emphasizing both the similarities but also the importance of providing a translation of the more complete Pali original. So here you see there is something different from what we've been talking about so far. At the same time, it's fair to remind you that the Chinese Anapanasati Sutta was also reprinted and circulated during the Republic of China, and which suggests that an interest was in the technique itself rather than in the Theravada text in which it was expounded. Yet, I think that this translation by Tang Yongtong is important and should be mentioned. The Anapanasati Sutta, both in new translations, in Tang Yongtong's translation and in the older Chinese translations, is still an important text for the Theravada practitioners in contemporary China. Another more important, probably, but later case is that regarding the Visuddhimagga. The Visuddhimagga, as you probably all know, is a systematic condensation of Buddhist doctrine and Theravada meditation techniques by the 5th century Indian commentator Buddhaghosa, and this text had never been previously translated into Chinese. It was translated in the 50s by a certain Ye Jun. Ye Jun is also known by his monastic names, Liao Cang, and the Pali name Dhammakirti. In fact, Ye Jun is one of the a member of the study abroad programs organized by Taixu, which have been so well studied by Ritzinger, Justin Ritzinger. So just to cut a long story short, in 1935 Taixu decided to organize these projects to train Chinese monks in South Asian Buddhist communities. The first of the two study abroad programs he organized was held in Sri Lanka in the following year, and the second one 10 years later. So Ye Jun was part of the second of these study abroad programs for Chinese monks. It is interesting to notice that these monks, not many of them, but interesting cases, they were explicitly tasked with retrieving pure original Buddhism and returning as model monks. That's what was stated about them in articles published in the Buddhist journals of the era. And interesting enough, all of them, including our Ye Jun, finally, at the end, eventually disrobed. But anyway, what is interesting for us to know is that the Visuddhimagga, translated by Ye Jun, was to become the most influential modern translation of any Pāli text. The Buddhist Academy of China, where Ye Jun taught Pāli, added it to the curriculum of studies as early as 1961, so even before he had finished the final draft. The translation was published in 1980, and thereafter it became one of the most renowned texts of the Theravada tradition in China. It is, for instance, it is used in the newly founded centers of Theravada meditation in contemporary China, and it is also used as a standard textbook also in many institutes of studies in mainstream Chinese monasteries, or in institutes of studies, for instance, in Sichuan, Nizhong Foshuan, it was already used in the mid-80s. Okay. So, significantly, Ye Jun, in his preface to the translation of the Visuddhimagga, mentions the Jie Tuo Taolong, the treatise on the path to liberation, the Visuddhimagga. It's usually given in Pāli. It's a reconstruction anyway, reconstructed name in Pāli. And Ye Jun stated, I quote his word, that the internal sequence and contents of the Visuddhimagga resembles, in many places, those of the Vimuttimagga. And he also pointed out that the author of the Vimuttimagga, Upatissa, lived approximately 200 years before Buddhaghosa. So the years of composition of the Vimuttimagga is debated by scholars, and it's not relevant in this case. What is relevant is that Ye Jun had a notion of this debate and wrote it down. And as a matter of fact, the Vimuttimagga, oh, sorry, this was just to tell you, this slide, it was just to tell you that the texts I'm mentioning are not the only translations from Pāli done during the Republic, even if there were not so many texts translated, there were quite a few, but I'm only mentioning those that are related directly to meditation. Okay, and here is the Vimuttimagga, sorry for this. So the Visuddhimagga, as a matter of fact, which is one of the very few extant Chinese canonical translations from Pāli, was one of the Chinese canonical texts that were rediscovered in the Republican era and celebrated as representations of the earlier Southern Buddhist teachings. Although it is overshadowed as it has been overshadowed as a full-fledged meditation manual by Ye's translation of the Visuddhimagga, the Visuddhimagga continues even today to attract the attention of Chinese practitioners, both in mainland China and in Taiwan. And this is true also for another compendium of Chinese, early meditation techniques. This one, written directly in Chinese, it's the already mentioned exposition of the Dhyana Paramita by Zhi, which is often quoted, studied together and compared with the Visuddhimagga also in contemporary times. And this allows me to come to my concluding remarks here. So differently from certain contemporary Vipassana movements, which, by the way, are not the majority, but still they exist nowadays in China, for instance, the Goenka's communities. Differently from those, during the Republic of China, the re-evaluation of the Southern Buddhist tradition did not imply the adoption of the Theravada model to cure. There was rather a trend to blend it with traditional Chinese Buddhism. So Chinese Buddhists adopted Hinayana or Theravada practices without feeling any need to question their own identity as Mahayana practitioners. And this is true even today in certain Buddhist milieus where Vipassana meditation is practiced. For instance, the Mahasati case I have been studying. So, several questions remain to be addressed, and I will just try to mention a few and try to address a few of them. So, first of all, what allowed all this to happen in China? Second, why did the enthusiasm for Theravada meditation resurface after the Maoist era, and why is it even more popular today? So as for the first question, why did this happen? We kind of have already mentioned it, just recap it in a few words. There were two distinct aspects to China's embrace of a modern Pan-Asian conception of Buddhism during the Republican era that are relevant to us. On the one hand, we have the acceptance of other traditions as equally valid elements within a single Buddhist ecumene. On the other, we have the rediscovery of long-forgotten Buddhist teachings that had been disregarded in China for centuries. Furthermore, the notion that Hinayana texts could be equated with original Buddhism resulted in a re-evaluation of these supposedly lesser teachings, and at the same time in a new appreciation of Pāli Buddhism. And it is against this background that a number of early meditation techniques, and we have seen a few of them: fasting, breathing exercises, meditation on impurity, the 4 bases of mindfulness, and so on. They were not only rediscovered in the Chinese canonical scriptures, tested and adopted by Chinese Buddhists, but also celebrated as equivalent to traditional Southern Buddhist techniques or Theravada practices. And as a result of that, texts like the Visuddhimagga found place and were also translated into Chinese. As you can see, it's an all-comprehensive picture that has different aspects that kind of belong together, all together. As for the second question, the resurgence of these trends after the Maoist era and their exponential growth over the last few decades may be attributed to mainly to two different aspects. First of all, the resilience of an ecumenical conception of Buddhism among mainstream Chinese Buddhists, and then also lay people's increasing interest in meditation. So, although some institutions retain in contemporary China, and I guess in Taiwan, but Professor Reinke will tell us about that in case, they kind of retain a strong Chan identity. A number of Chinese mainstream monasteries now favor a non-sectarian approach that allows them to incorporate elements from all the major Buddhist traditions, Chan, Pure Land, of course, but also Tibetan, also Japanese, and Theravada. So this acceptance of practices from outside the Chan and Yanfo traditions obviously created fertile ground for Theravada meditation to develop alongside its Chinese counterparts. Moreover, the theory that Theravada is the most authentic representation of early or original Buddhism clearly provides a significant boost to its popularity. On the other hand, and this is only going to be mentioned here because it really doesn't concern our topic today, there is something new in the contemporary times. The recent surge of interest in Theravada meditation may also be explained by the accessibility of the modern forms of Vipassana as viable alternatives to strictly theoretical and scholastic approaches to Buddhist practice. This is a topic that has been studied by Elsa Lau, and that really it doesn't concern us today. So it's really another story to be told elsewhere, but I thought I kind of had to at least mention it. And this, I believe, is very different from the contemporary situation and what happened during the Republic of China. And with this, I have finished. Thank you.